Welcome to our ongoing analysis of the Hamas-Israel war. Today's webinar is the 17th. Like earlier webinars, this one's titled Israel 9/11, with today's topic aimed at reviewing so far, exactly 4 months today, how the war has been impacting or considered or remembered or even chronicled in Israeli culture. I'm Ken Stein, the president of the Center for Israel Education and Emory University Emeritus Professor of Contemporary Middle Eastern History, Political Science, and Israel Studies. A word about our Center for Israel Education. We established the center in 2008 to respond to student, adult, and educator inquiries. People sought reliable sources, documents, and data about Zionism and Israel's origins. Please visit our homepage, israeled.org. Go to the website, and if you feel inclined, you can donate and help us sustain what we do. Please note that we have a special tab on the homepage that directs you to materials about the war with Hamas. Worldwide, there have been multiple reactions to Hamas's killing of 1,200 Israelis and others abducted on October 7th. Those reactions rippled through Israeli society, through the Middle East, through the international community. Many Israelis themselves were driven to the center part of the country, with somewhere between 175 and 200,000 Israelis today as internal refugees in their own country. As Israelis cope with range of emotions, memorials, memory, documents, artifacts are all being collected and preserved. We're delighted today to examine, even in a preliminary manner, the cultural effects of the war. To that end, we're delighted to welcome Naomi Schacter of the National Library of Israel, Dr. Arieh Saposnik of Ben-Gurion University, Dr. Susan Nashman Fraiman, and Dr. Eli Sperling of the University of Georgia. Arieh, if you would be so kind as to put October 7th into some sort of framework and make comparison, if you can, to other such extraordinary shocks to the Israeli society. And the two I'm thinking of immediately are the June 67 war and the 73 war.
I actually want to begin, before I respond directly to your question, I'll share with you that a friend of mine arrived from the US today. I drove to the airport to pick him up. I had an hour and a half to drive. And I did something I rarely do, which is I listen to the radio. Usually I listen to music. And I want to tell you what I heard on the radio. So first, there was an interview with Dan Harel, who's a senior military leader, who spoke about his question marks regarding what interests there are, even in our current government, to end the war, to bring the hostages home, and so forth. Shortly after that, there was the wife of one of the hostages who lives up north and is currently under fire as she's trying to do what she can to bring her husband home. After her, there was an interviewee who was a social worker from Sderot, who's been in reserve duty essentially since October 7th, and who is soon going to be pressured to return home to Sderot, even as the military and the government assure us that it is not safe. Following him was a father of a young man murdered at the Nova Festival party, where there were hundreds of young people murdered. He could barely speak with his fury. This is the reality. If we want to talk about Israeli culture after October 7th, this is the reality in which culture is being made. It's a reality in which I think Israelis and Jews around the world feel abandoned in almost unprecedented degree and almost unprecedented ways, both by groups and people that we expected to be allies, as well as, for many Israelis, a sense of abandonment by our own government. You asked me to compare this with previous events, and actually, in contrast to 1967, I would put it in a number of other contexts. First of all, 1948. 1948 was the last time, up until October 7th, in which portions of Israeli territory were actually captured by an enemy in wartime. This happened again on October 7th, as towns and kibbutzim and the Gaza envelope area, as it's called, were actually conquered and held for between 24 and 48 hours until the IDF was able to recapture them. Another parallel that comes to mind is actually 1881. And 1881 is widely considered the moment of birth of what was first called Chibat Zion, love of Zion, later to be termed Zionism. 1881 was the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in the Russian Empire, and in the wake of that, there was a wave of pogroms that are considered to have served as the prime catalyst in awakening Chibat Zion. However, I think it's important to stress that at least as important than the pogroms themselves was the profound disappointment of Jewish intellectuals who expected people like Tolstoy, the humanist, the pacifist, to speak out against these anti-Jewish attacks, the Russian revolutionaries, the socialist revolutionaries, to speak out. And in fact, not only did these people not speak out, but in the case of many of the revolutionary movements, they actually celebrated the pogroms as instances of the masses rising. That parallel has been very loud, at least for those of us who study history and study Zionist history. I want just to say something, if this is the broad context, a few instances of what we can talk about in terms of some aspects of Israeli culture today. There have been demonstrations on Israeli streets for a year now. They were on hiatus after October 7th for a while. They're gaining ground again. As I was thinking about presenting today, I thought, what demonstrations would I talk about? These are calls to demonstrations. These are photos from demonstrations. You can see the SOS, an indication of what the general feeling is here. The Hebrew reads Bchirot Achshav, elections now. Here's a sign that says in Hebrew, Begin hitpater matai ata. Begin resigned during the first Lebanon War in the 1980s. When will you resign? I wondered what kinds of rallies on behalf of the hostages to talk about. This is an image from one of them. This is an installation which have been proliferating throughout Israel of empty Shabbat tables. Over 240 people were kidnapped by Hamas operatives and by civilians coming in from Gaza on October 7th. 136 remain. And this is one of the kinds of installations you can see, by the way, in this photo. There's a high chair. There are young children, babies who are among the abductees. And this has become a very widespread type of phenomenon. This is another call as we mark the 4-month point since October 7th. You can notice the word 7, Shiv'ah, in Hebrew, height or enlarged here, indicating, of course, Shiv'ah as well. The sense of abandonment, the sense that the world has abandoned Israel and Jews. I think this is a widespread sentiment, and the sense in this sign in particular of abandonment by our own government with its tremendous failings leading up to October 7th. One of the aspects of Israeli popular culture these days is a tremendous proliferation of satirical TV shows. I haven't studied this statistically, but if somebody looked at the statistics, my guess is we'd find out that Israeli society has a disproportionate number of satires. And those satires are often pointed outward. I have some videos of, for example, BBC reporting on the conflict. It's very tendentious reporting on the conflict, and satires aimed also internally at the government. I want to just stress one final point, and that has to do with the circles of impact of October 7th. You would be hard-pressed to find virtually anybody in Israel who doesn't in some way have some connection to someone who was either murdered on October 7th, who is a hostage in Gaza, whose families are families of hostages. I am very fortunate to be in a rather distant circle. And I'll tell you what it means to be in a distant circle. To be in a distant circle means that my family, thankfully, is all very safe. But I have a friend and colleague whose daughter and son-in-law were murdered on October 7th. I have another colleague whose nephew is hostage at the moment, and I could go on. The Ben-Gurion University community has been very hard hit in terms of people killed and hostages who are still in Gaza as we speak. And this is the condition in which the culture is now being created and evolving, this sense of abandonment and a sense that assumptions that we had about what it means to have a Jewish state and to be in a Jewish state and to be Jewish in the world have been undermined and are being re-examined. And this is what I think every cultural manifestation we can talk about today is part of that renewed search.
There's
That's
no
a
doubt that the culture is percolating.
is indeed.
Given Israel, it'll probably percolate for a good long time. Let me switch over to Susan and ask her to make a comment or two about art and how she has seen changes or variations, new genres or new depictions.
I want to make basically 4 points or 5 points about art activity now. One is art activity is going on, meaning many of the exhibits that were planned to open, regardless of the war, have opened in small galleries. The museums were closed at the beginning because of war, because of the fear of bombing. Some international exhibits were canceled, but by and large, all the museums are now open. And generally speaking, regular gallery exhibits are going on. That's the first point. The second point is that there are special activities going on. In other words, this is an exhibit in the Supreme Court building of artists from the Otef, the Gaza envelope, the area that wraps around Gaza Strip. And these are artists who live there. These works didn't necessarily respond to the war, but they're on display now at the Supreme Court, and the exhibit was extended to the end of February. Now, in Kibbutz Be'eri, which is one of the oldest kibbutzim in that area, and of course took one of the hardest hits during that period, there was a very well-known Israeli art gallery, even though they were very much on the periphery in certain ways. And this gallery was really known all over Israel, had many beautiful exhibits. And this is how the gallery looked after October 7th. But what I want to say about the Be'eri Gallery, which is quite amazing, is that city of Tel Aviv has offered to rebuild the gallery, host them temporarily for the next 3 years in Tel Aviv. And this is this whole period now, the amount of giving, sharing the people are doing, and it also applies in the art world. For instance, this woman, Dr. Ziva Yelin, she is the curator of the Be'eri Gallery, and now she's going to be opening up in Tel Aviv. And one of her paintings that was miraculously saved from the gallery is now on display at the Israel Museum. Another work which is getting a lot of press in Israel, a lot of attention, particularly on Facebook, are these postcards, the daily postcard by an artist named Zev Shoshka. His persona is Shoshka Engelmeyer, and you can find him on Facebook. And these postcards are so popular that they put them on the outside of the Herzliya Museum of Art. And the postcards express fear, but also hope and caring. The Koch family from Kfar Aza, a very beautiful family, killed on October 7th. Here's a work that Engelmeyer did. Here it says, Hayeh Shalom Mishpachat Koch. Go in peace. So Engelmeyer takes a whimsical or a hopeful or a dreamlike way of looking at these terrible events. He imagines that Carmel is having a yoga lesson in the tunnels of Gaza where they're kept as hostages and so forth. Here he has the map of hope. This is the map of where were you when the siren went off. The map of hope has been adopted by the education ministry and are being shown to high school students in Israel. And this is such a positive response that the kids can see positive things that have come out of the war, the solidarity, as Rabbi Shure Bayit, help in homework, help in picking tomatoes. In other words, all the good things that people are doing during this period to help each other out, which has been very beautiful response of Israeli society. Another function of art has been healing. People have had workshops where people do art to express their emotions during this period. And here you see an embroidery workshop where one of the women focused on the captivity, the yellow ribbon, and said, enough, 100 days in captivity, a nightmare. But people using art also to express. Here is an installation. The last thing I want to talk about is memorialization. How do we look at this? How are we going to commemorate this? And I would say that that is a changing thing. But right now, one artist is having people make ceramic poppies. Now, the South is known for these poppies. They bloom at this time of year. And usually at this time of year, there's a festival. They're called Kalaniot. And this festival is called the Red South. It doesn't translate very well. In Hebrew, it sounds better, Doromadom. They canceled it this year for obvious reasons. But she has a goal of making 1,000 of these flowers, and she wants to put them in various sites around Israel to commemorate the people who died during this war. So art has many functions during this period. I think it also reflects many beautiful aspects of Israeli society.
Naomi, talk a little bit about the National Library and how it is engaged in monitoring, assembling, considering how to collect, how to preserve. Tell us a little bit about the library's engagement 4 months now since October 7th.
The library's moving into its new iconic building. Our life right now is completely intertwined with war. We were having our grand opening after years and years of a planning process and a building process and planning major openings that were to happen the week of October 15th. Needless to say, we canceled all our events, but we made the decision that we were going to open up the reading rooms anyway. And we did on October 29th, just a week later than we had planned to. We felt a commitment to the people who sit in our reading rooms. Susan is one of them, I see frequently there. And we had closed the library in the Givat Ram campus, and we really felt a commitment to open. So we have been living the war in our own way, as everybody does. And as I would kind of half joke with people, despite the cancellation of the big openings, we never lost perspective of the bigger picture and how terrible it is, and the library being unimportant detail in that story of October 7th and its aftermath. But it's impacted everything. We had a full line of cultural events underway. The full work plan was built for 2024. We had to scrap it. We had to rethink what feels appropriate to do. I think people need art, people need music, people need performances, people need poetry. We need all these things. And so we just pivoted and rethought what would be appropriate. And we really have moved forward very dramatically. When we opened on October 29th, we were opening the reading rooms, and we did not anticipate that people would start pouring into the building, and we had to accommodate and start offering tours, even though the full visitor experience wasn't ready. Our exhibition galleries on October 6th were fully ready for our opening the next week and installed, both our permanent exhibition gallery and our rotating exhibition gallery. And on October 7th, with the sirens, with the rockets, more accurately, our security team and our conservation team went to the library and dismantled the entire exhibition and brought it below ground for safekeeping, because these are valuable things and there were rockets flying. We have since reinstalled things right before Hanukkah, but a main point that I want to make is this feeling of what is art and what offers healing during this time. Because what we have found is that people are coming in such large abundance to the library that obviously it's a wonderful problem to have, but I'll be honest, we're figuring it out. It feels like an island of beauty and calm and intellect and hope. And people need hope right now. The building itself, designed by the architects Herzog and Zimmermann, among the top architectural firms in the world. It's the first building they've done in Israel. This is actually a view of the library that people see a little less. It's the north face of it. But even the facade, the curves, what we call these punch windows, the light that goes in and out, this in itself is art that somehow is offering some sort of salve to people, some sort of calming of the spirit. And the reading rooms, the signature circular reading rooms, it's a very beautiful building. Here you can see some more shots. And I'm even weirdly showing you staircases because the staircases are like modern sculpture. They're like art. And people just walk down and they look up, and they walk up and they look down. And so somehow the very essence of this building is offering some sort of comfort, some sort of healing of the spirit. I'm going to talk a little bit more about very conscious memorializing we did on the Shloshim of October 7th. The beginning of the visitor experience at the library is this room where you have a preview of interesting information about the library, and then a very wonderful 5-minute video of how you connect to books, how you connect to music, how you connect to your heritage and identity. And that kind of leads you into the permanent exhibition space.
Let me throw this to Eli so he can talk a little bit about music.
So one of the things that I think is most striking in looking at the situation is how much the past is being repeated in the present in terms of music's role in these moments of national tragedy. We see artists performing across the country for soldiers. We see pop-up concerts for communities in the Gaza region, as well as around the country in the north, and even those in the center of the country that may not be as directly impacted by violence or any number of circumstances. But whether it be 1948 and Chaim Hefer's Chizbatron, the Palmach band performing for soldiers, whether it be Eric Einstein and other pop artists performing in 67 or 73, even protest songs against and for the 1982 Lebanon war, we see all of these trends repeating themselves. We see protest songs that are quite critical of the government. And Arieh, to your point about satire, we see a range of musical satire coming out now. There is a parody of Simon and Garfunkel's 1964 hit, The Sound of Silence. It is titled in Hebrew, Get Out of Here, and it is a strong rebuke of the current government coalition and Netanyahu, saying literally, get out of here, wanting to see new elections and new leadership. We also see songs that are being released in response to the violence that are quite nationalist. A recent hip-hop hit by Israeli duo Ness and Stilla called Harbu Darbu, which is a Hebrew euphemism in translation of Syrian Arabic that essentially is to destroy our enemy or rain hellfire upon our enemy, that is wildly popular with younger, more conservative audiences in Israel, but has garnered great international condemnation. So we see different domestic political voices being shown through music and current production of music, but we also see artists like David Broza, for example, playing over 115 pop-up concerts just as entertainment, which is quite common for Israeli artists and even military ensembles to just provide some respite from the anxiety and pain of these moments, but also as a bonding agent. And I think this is one of the other consistent threads I want to pull through from 1948, from even earlier periods during the Mandate and before, where Hebrew song was a bonding agent of Hebrew culture. It was a bonding agent amongst Jews in Palestine and then Israel amongst so many consistent moments of pain and anxiety surrounding warfare. And we see that across the board. Even a rave planned marking 100 days of war. And of course, this is quite pertinent as electronic music and the electronic music scene in Israel were hit so hard by this tragedy when a music party was attacked and hundreds were killed in the Gaza region. And so across the board, across genres, we are seeing events for the public, for soldiers, and even on the international stage. We see artists like Achinoam Nini representing the left, performing for Jewish audiences in South America. We see David Broza going beyond pop-ups in Israel, performing for American audiences. And I think this component of diaspora Israel times, which is my major topic of research in the field of Hebrew song, it is permeating across borders. And I want to bring up a point here too in this global discussion where it's not just a bonding agent, music is a polemic. We even saw in the recent Grammys, Annie Lennox make a call for a ceasefire as part of her musical performance. And we saw many Israeli musicians even up for certain awards making comment on the situation in the broader Grammy discussion. We also see questions about whether Eurovision will be hosted in Israel, and a variety of views coming out amongst Israeli artists. Should this be moved to Tel Aviv? Should we push forward in the plan for Jerusalem? We see politicians from around the world calling for Eurovision to be boycotted in Israel, and even Achinoam Nini, a historic member of Israel's left in the artist community, calling for Eurovision to come to Israel, and that this is actually quite important in not isolating Israeli artists who tend to be members of the center left to left, but we see a variety of voices. And one final point I want to make here in the international discussion, it's so important to remember that conscription in Israel really creates a different circumstance at home for artists than we see in many other countries around the world. Many Israeli artists are actively fighting or are fighting in Miluim, and a very, very popular Israeli Mizrahi artist and star of Fauda, Idan Amedi, was seriously wounded while serving in the reserves in Gaza. And we've seen this outpouring from fans and his colleagues in the music business and in film really coming to his support. So many artists are either former soldiers themselves or are even actively fighting as part of the Israeli military effort, that the hard lines of politics aren't necessarily a part of music culture in times of war, but as we've seen with parody and even more right-wing songs like Harbu Darbu, it is actively an agent of bonding, but it is an instrument of different communities and political camps in Israel to air grievance, as it may be, or to in some way communicate a point within Israeli politics or social discourse. And in many ways, as I said, these are representative of consistent trends throughout the Yishuv and then Israeli history.
A very rich presentation. Eli picks up the phrase acceptance. Israel's not being accepted. Israel is recognized, but it's not accepted. This is like questioning the whole notion of the state. Those kinds of questions are always asked in times of grievance and shock about where we are and how did we get here. What can you tell us about art and artists?
Well, there was a big artist petition about a month and a half ago in November against Israel by artists from all over the world. And then there was a counter petition to that. As you can imagine, the art community tends to be more on the left. And as a result of that, people who support Israel, who are artists around the world, oftentimes don't feel comfortable. It's a problem. And I think that Israeli artists actually spoke up about this, that they felt abandoned by their artist colleagues abroad. This was very much in the press, particularly at the beginning, when it was so clear before Israel even entered the ground operation. People were shocked by the response around the world, that people saying, why aren't they supporting us? So there was a lot. The art community felt a little bit like the rug was pulled out from under them here in Israel. And I think in general, this is an issue for artists who support Israel right now. They feel in the minority in wherever they are.
Ari, what have you detected from peers about those who engaged in Zionist history, Zionist culture, people who have reached out to you or haven't, people who have gone silent? We know in the States there are all sorts of controversies ongoing.
It's no secret that the academic community, like Susan was saying about the art community, tends to the left. And for a number of decades now, there have been certain orthodoxies that have become established, especially in the study of Israel and the Middle East. And we hear those. I'm sure most people here probably saw the Cornell historian who proclaimed how exhilarated he was to see October 7th. The statement put out by Harvard students on October 7th or 8th, before Israel had even responded at all placing all of the blame for October 7th on Israel. I'm sorry, I'm kind of a downer today, but I think there's a real sense there too of not only abandonment, which I spoke about earlier, I think that's very much present as well, but also, and I just finished writing something on this, a betrayal even of academic principles in the ways in which Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are discussed in many academic circles. Another sort of traumatic moment that has echoed a great deal in recent discourse is the Yom Kippur War. For 50 years, we have spoken about the Mechdal, the terrible failing of the Golda Meir government in 1973. And today it feels like that failing pales in comparison. That's one thing I wanted to add. And again, related to your original question, Ken, is the issue of what seems to echo in terms of historical precedent. I always used to tell my students, even also when I was teaching in the US, long before October 7th, 2023, that we cannot understand Israeli society without understanding it as post-traumatic in many senses. Think about the historiography of Zionism, which likes to divide history into waves of immigration, the aliyot. The first aliyah, which begins after a wave of pogroms in Russia. The second aliyah, which begins after another wave of pogroms, even more violent in Russia. The third aliyah, which begins after a world war and an even more violent wave of pogroms. And I could go on. And I think that sense of trauma and brokenness is really reflected in what much of cultural activity is doing today. Naomi spoke about hope and the search for hope. Zionism was largely about an effort to allow Jews to become members of the community of nations. That was really the fundamental Zionist goal. I think that in the 1990s, for example, we had a feeling that that was about to happen. And I think the 21st century has been a process of gradually turning Israel and the Jews back into a pariah nation. And October 7th feels like a final blow. And I think we are researching once again for answers to that. And I think that is really what a lot of Israeli cultural activity is doing these days.
Naomi, you represent the National Library, itself a structure that reflects the identity of Zionism and the state. Tell us a little bit more about its effort to encompass people, to embrace them in learning about this history.
By law, the 2007 National Library of Israel law, we are the collective memory of the Jewish people. We are not only the National Library of Israel, we're the Library of the Jewish people worldwide. Mm-hmm. And in this role of taking seriously the collecting, the conserving, the offering access for now and for future generations, within a few days of October 7th, we started collecting everything that happened. We harvest the internet. Believe it or not everything lasts on the internet. We started very, very systematically collecting materials from the internet related to October 7th and the continuation, printed materials, poetry, music, all the kind of things, Eli, that you were referring to that are part of this story. We currently have about 70 partners here in Israel and around the world, and we are collecting everything. So we're the coordinators, we're the conveners, we are the platform for showing these things. We call this project Bearing Witness. And I want to make clear that just because it lives in one place on our platform never precludes that whoever is doing that collecting, whoever has done those documentaries, photographs, etc., it can live on their website as well. But the idea is that there will be one place where everything is documented. And it quickly became clear that this was not only about Israel, this was about the Jewish world more broadly. And we're partnering with organizations abroad. You can share your materials. We're processing them. So again, we're not doing everything. The WhatsApps are all being collected. we see this as part of what the mission is of the National Library of Israel. It's kind of taken over the library, very frankly. A lot of departments are involved in this. As I said, we are collecting a lot of material, but we are by no means collecting everything. Other people are doing the documentaries, the WhatsApp work, etc. And it's really interesting. One of our partners is the USC Shoah Foundation around oral histories. We're working with other groups doing oral histories as well. And in early conversation with them, they said it's so important that you're getting started, because another thing that's different is we're doing it in real time. We're not waiting and then going back, and that's unusual. And what he said is that with the Shoah, there are so many different groups involved, and they're kind of siloed and not connected. And we're doing our best to sort of really keep things thoroughly cooperative and inclusive.
The connectivity seems important, the communal nature of the response, both in terms of memory and in terms of what people do on a day-to-day basis. Eli, what's the memorialization of this? What's the memory of this? Children in Israel or Jewish kids around the world or non-Jews around the world? What should be remembered?
Out of all these songs that are emerging from this context, and certainly performances of music that has a nostalgic place in Israeli society, or any number of signals as to what artists want to present with performances, we see a moment of unity. I think there is a search for hope through music, but also a robust sense of diversity. And the pain of this moment has impacted so many different communities in Israel in different ways. And we see these very unique expressions through music. And it's not just Jewish Israelis, by the way. We see the Arab Israeli population and artists from that sector coming forward, utilizing music even as a message of hope to Palestinians in Gaza and or the West Bank, and a variety of different opinions within Jewish Israeli society about what this means, maybe the political implications, political wants. And 10, 15, 20 years down the road, I think that this can serve as another example, as this is very much fitting into past trends of Israelis coming together in these moments, providing a sense of mutual goals, of a mutual past, but also deep variety. We see different voices coming from the Mizrahi community through music. We see a variety of voices coming from younger artists that represent maybe even more conservative, youthful approaches, and certainly songs representing the left and everything in between. And here's another example of how Israel as a democracy is able to maintain very robust artistic scenes that are not censored and that truly represent the diversity of voices, voices of pain, and maybe, let's say, aspirations for hope within this moment that are unique and distinct but share great common threads. And I would say that this is consistent throughout musical history in Israel, especially in this time.
Memory changes over time. You can look at Yad Vashem as a good example of the different memorials that have been added there over the years. At the beginning, there was only one memorial for bravery, and then now it's been added like 10, 15 memorials for bravery. In other words, at the beginning, memory might be more general, and then over time might be more specific. But I think that one thing is that the artists' voices were not silenced. All kinds of art are being produced, both positive, both critical. Engelmeyer's works are not all upbeat by any means. He's just one example. Every day he turns out a work, every day. So it's very much of the moment. I think one can say that during this period, art has taken on a role also of comforting people, of offering a home for people, for the artists. It gives them a place. I heard a lecture last night of 3 artists from the South. None of them are living at home right now. One's in a hotel, one's in a rented apartment, one's at his in-laws' house and a kibbutz, but they're continuing to work, exhibit, The importance of art is that it shows the strength of life, the vitality of the Israeli cultural scene. And I think that would be a good memory.
Two things I'll say. First, a concern, and then I'll try and end with a positive note. The people that I study, these early Zionists, grew up in a reality in which being Jewish meant a sense of profound humiliation, meant a sense of being homeless, and often meant a sense of feeling under existential threat. And I grew up in a world in which that seemed like a distant past. I grew up in a world in which there was already a Jewish state. Jews in America had become a pillar of American culture and society. I always assumed that I had brought my daughters into a world in which the early 20th century experience was long since over. And I'm no longer sure of that. My hope is that my daughters will be able to live their lives as Jews without having to experience the kinds of things that the people that I study experienced. That's my concern. The way that I hope this will be remembered, maybe it's really directly related. After the 1881 pogroms, a guy by the name of Peretz Smolenskin wrote an essay called Nechapsa Darkeinu, let us search our ways. And that was sort of a call for searching our ways. And that search led to the revolutionary changes that Zionism brought about. I hope the search that we're beginning now will be able to lead to such inconceivably productive things, the inconceivable productivity of what Zionism brought about. If we can somehow echo that in our current searches.
Wars have a way of unleashing totally unexpected conclusions. And the ones that you think you have today are not going to be there in 5 years. And the ones you thought you had, they will have disappeared. That's just the nature of history. It's never linear. And when you have major shifts in the tectonic plates, some things get swallowed up and other things evolve. If there's one word to demonstrate the entire presentation today, I think it would be the word vibrancy. There's a vibrancy about the society, about the memory, about resilience, about playing your role, of articulating your feeling, and in doing it not only for yourself, but doing it for others, which is part of the community. And that you detect in 120 days, which is not terribly different from the very reason why the state was created in the first place. I think if you go back and you look at what happened between the partition plan of 47 and the declaration of the state in 48, the entire society acted without the force of law behind it in order to make something as a dream actually turn into a reality. So there's a sense of doing. That's why I come up with the word vibrancy. It's been enormously enriching, and I want to thank all of you